When a broken billionaire walked into his own restaurant disguised as a homeless man, the staff laughed, except one black waitress. She served him food with shaking hands, and what happened next made the entire city question who the real beggar was. Montrose Heights was the kind of town that wore its silence like silk. Everything gleamed: marble sidewalks, luxury storefronts, manicured hedges, but behind the polish was a kind of cold that money couldn't warm. And on a Tuesday morning that looked like any other, Oliver Peters was nothing like the man they used to know. He sat on a damp bench just a block away from La Vérité, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the state. His restaurant. His clothes were layered and mismatched, his beard unkempt, eyes hollow. He hadn't shaved in weeks, hadn't looked in a mirror in months. There was a crust of dried soup on the corner of his jacket sleeve, and the laces on one of his boots were tied with a twist of dental floss. People passed him without looking. He was part of the street, just another smear on Montrose's otherwise pristine canvas. Oliver pulled the collar of his coat higher. The wind bit hard, but not as hard as memory. 6 months ago he stood in this same city with a champagne flute in his hand, a headline in Forbes, and people pretending to be friends. 6 months ago he thought wealth protected you, but it didn't protect his brother from overdose. It didn't protect his wife from walking out when grief got ugly. And it didn't protect him from waking up one morning and realizing he had no one left who knew him. Not really. Today he wasn't there for vengeance. He wasn't there to test anyone. He just wanted to feel something again, even if that something was humiliation. Inside La Vérité, the staff prepped for another highbrow lunch rush. Doris Martinez had been on her feet since 6:30 a.m., wiping down crystal glasses and setting silverware so polished it reflected the ceiling. She was the only black woman on staff, and often the only one the customers ignored. At 31, she was still working double shifts and sending half her tips back home to support her mother's dialysis. Doris didn't wear her exhaustion on her face. She wore it in her silence, in how she moved around the restaurant like a ghost with purpose. No one asked about her life, they assumed they knew it. Her boss, Grant, a stiff man with salt and pepper hair and a permanent sneer, called her Martinez like it was a slur. "Smile more," he'd bark, as if she owed her joy to the room. She smiled less. But Doris knew struggle. She saw things others didn't. And when the front doors swung open at 11:57 a.m. and a figure shuffled in smelling of wet cardboard and brokenness, she noticed something no one else did. He wasn't confused, he wasn't panicking, he wasn't begging, he was watching. The hostess froze, then smirked, then leaned toward Grant and whispered, "Should I call security?" The kitchen crew stopped mid-motion, a few snickers echoing from behind the line. But before anyone could move, Doris stepped forward. She met the man's eyes. Something in them stopped her cold. They were tired, yes, but not hollow. Familiar somehow, like a story half remembered. "You okay, sir?" she asked softly. The man nodded. His lips trembled, but he didn't speak. Grant's voice boomed from the back. "Get him out, Martinez. This is La Vérité, not a shelter." But she didn't flinch. Instead, she led him gently toward a corner booth, the one near the window where the sun hit just right. Her hands shook as she placed a menu on the table, though she knew he couldn't read it. "I'll get you something warm," she whispered. Grant's face turned red. "Are you insane? He's going to scare the guests." "I'll cover it," she said. "Take it from my shift." He stared at her, furious, but momentarily stunned, then stormed off. The man looked up, eyes wet now. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated, then smiled. "Not the kind you put on for customers, the kind that cost you something. Because no one deserves to be treated like trash, not even on a Tuesday." Outside, a woman with a stroller paused at the window, watching the scene unfold. A young couple nearby whispered and laughed. But inside that booth, something sacred was happening. He had no idea her kindness would break him open, and she had no idea that the man she just served was worth over $600 million. The soup arrived quietly, tomato bisque, piping hot, served with crusty sourdough. Doris placed it in front of him, still trembling. Her hands weren't shaking from fear, but from the weight of the moment. She had defied her manager. Again, One more strike, and she'd be gone. But she couldn't look at this man, this ghost in skin, and pretend he didn't matter. Oliver didn't touch the bowl right away. His eyes were on her hands. They were cracked at the knuckles, clean but calloused. Hands of someone who's had to work too hard for too long. "Thank you," he said softly. Doris blinked. The words sounded like they hadn't been spoken in weeks. Not just the gratitude, the voice itself. She gave a small nod, then stepped back, letting him eat in peace. But peace was hard to come by. From the corner of her eye she saw Grant watching, arms folded, lips pressed, his jaw twitching with judgment. "He's scaring the customers," he hissed. "You want him here. He's your table. Serve him. Clean up after him. And don't come crying when you're looking for a new job." Doris didn't respond. She just turned and walked away, grabbing a pitcher of water. But Oliver heard it. He heard all of it. And something in him twisted, not in anger, but guilt. This was his place, his walls, his menu, his staff. He'd built this place with love once. It had been his brother's dream, before addiction swallowed him whole. Now it was this, a house of cruelty. He looked down at the soup, took a bite, and tried not to cry when it scalded his mouth. He welcomed the burn. It was the first real thing he'd felt in weeks. Doris returned just as he finished the bowl. She placed the water down gently. "No rush," she said. "You can sit here. I'll make sure no one bothers you." He met her eyes, surprised. "You don't even know me," he murmured. Doris shrugged. "I don't need to." A pause hung between them, heavy and human. Then he asked, almost like a child, "Why are you kind to me?" Her answer was simple. "Because someone once was kind to me when I didn't deserve it." Oliver swallowed hard. His vision blurred. The sunlight from the window caught the tears before he could wipe them away. She pretended not to see. From the kitchen window the chefs watched in confusion. One of the waiters whispered, "Martinez is feeding the hobo." Another one replied, "Wait till Grant loses it." They laughed, but not Doris and not Oliver, because in that moment something shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. If this moment hit you, if it made you feel something, maybe it's because you've been invisible too. Don't just watch, subscribe. We tell stories like these for people like you. Back in the dining room, Doris returned with a small plate, 2 warm rolls, and a wrapped chocolate from the dessert bar. "Don't tell anyone," she said with a sly grin. "Perks of sitting in my section." Oliver chuckled under his breath. That sound startled even him. A laugh. His own laugh. It sounded like something from another life. "Are you always like this?" he asked. "Like what?" "Kind." Doris considered that for a second, then answered, "No. Just when it matters." Outside, clouds had begun to gather. The first flickers of fall wind stirred the trees, brushing gold leaves against the restaurant window. Inside, 2 strangers sat in silence, one hiding everything, the other giving everything she had. Neither of them knew that this quiet moment over soup and kindness would set off a chain of events that would expose the heart of the restaurant, shake the town, and change both of their lives forever. Oliver returned the next day, and the day after that, always in the same worn coat, always before lunch rush, always to Doris's section. He didn't say much, just sat quietly at the same table by the window, where the sun still touched the booth just right, and waited for her to arrive. And she always did. She'd bring him a bowl of soup, sometimes rolls, sometimes tea if no one was watching. He never asked for anything, he never gave a name, and she never pushed. But the whispers had started. The other servers called him the Phantom. Grant called him her pet project. One afternoon, when Doris stepped into the kitchen to grab clean silverware, she heard 2 co-workers laughing. "She thinks she's better than us now," one sneered, "serving some crusty street rat like he's royalty." "Watch," another added, "she's going to get canned over this, you'll see." Doris stood there, frozen for a second, not because of the words, but because a part of her feared they might be right. That night, she stayed late to clean the back counters. When she finally stepped out into the alley behind the restaurant, the rain had started, and Oliver was there, waiting in the shadows, not lurking, not hiding, just standing under a flickering lamppost, drenched but still. "Why are you still here?" she asked, half startled, half scolding. He looked at her with tired eyes. "I didn't want to leave before thanking you." She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "You already thanked me. You've been eating here all week." "I know, but that's not what I meant." He stepped forward slowly. "I've had people serve me wine worth more than their cars, but no one's ever handed me bread like it mattered." Doris didn't know what to say. Her instinct was to brush it off, make a joke, walk away, deflect. But something about his voice made her pause. He sounded ashamed, not for being poor, but for not having felt kindness in so long that it shocked him. Back inside, Grant was watching from the office window, his jaw tight, his mind spinning. The next morning, Doris arrived to find a memo on the staff board. All service staff are required to report loiterers to management immediately. No free meals or unsanctioned service will be tolerated. This is a fine dining establishment, not a charity. Her name wasn't on the note, but everyone knew it was for her. She crumpled it silently and served Oliver anyway. But now she was pulling back, resisting the connection. She spoke less, stopped sitting at his booth for too long. Her eyes darted every time Grant passed by. Oliver felt it. "I can leave," he said one afternoon, pushing the untouched tea aside. Doris hesitated, then lied. "It's not about you, I'm just tired." But her eyes betrayed her. "You're scared," he said. She didn't answer. He leaned closer. "Did I cause trouble for you?" Still nothing. Finally she said, "You didn't. But the world doesn't like it when people care too much about those they think deserve nothing." He studied her face, the weight she carried, the quiet rebellion in her posture. Then he whispered, "They're wrong." That night, Oliver didn't sleep in the alley. He walked 3 miles to the edge of the city, where an abandoned storage unit still had an old mattress he'd once had dropped off for a former kitchen worker who lost his apartment. He lay awake thinking of Doris. Her silence hurt more than Grant's insults ever could, but he understood. After all, wasn't he doing the same thing? Resisting, hiding, lying. Every time she looked at him with kindness, he felt unworthy, because he had the power to change her life, and he wasn't doing it. If you were Doris, would you keep serving him, knowing you could lose your job? And if you were Oliver, would you finally tell her the truth? Comment below. What would you choose? Back in Montrose Heights, rumors began to spread. Someone had snapped a photo, a blurry image of Doris, handing a plate to Oliver with a soft look on her face. It showed up on a local Facebook group with the caption, "La Vérité Waitress babying the homeless again, hope she's proud." It racked up hundreds of comments in hours. Some called her a saint. Others told the restaurant to fire her immediately. The pressure was rising. The city was watching, and the secret of who Oliver really was still sat quietly in that booth, eating soup, hiding everything. The first snow came early that year. It dusted Montrose Heights in a quiet white blanket, softening the sharp edges of its luxury buildings and million-dollar homes. But for those without roofs and without privilege, it wasn't peaceful. It was survival. By noon, the sky had turned grey. Wind howled down side streets, cars crawled through slush, and Oliver Peters, despite the layers he wore, was shivering uncontrollably by the time he reached La Vérité. Doris saw him from across the dining room the moment he stepped in. His lips were blue. His hands, raw and red, trembled as he pulled off his gloves. She didn't ask anything. She just walked to the kitchen, poured hot water into a teacup, and brought it straight to his booth. No menu, no questions, just care. Grant saw it too. But this time he didn't bark. He waited until Doris passed by the office door, then snapped, "Martinez, my office, now." She froze, handed off a tray to another server, and followed. The office door slammed behind her. "You think I'm stupid?" he said. She didn't answer. Grant leaned in, voice low. "This ends today. You serve him one more time, you're done. No warning, no second chance." Doris clenched her fists. "He hasn't done anything to anyone," Grant scoffed. "He's doing something to this restaurant. He's ruining our image." There it was again, image over integrity. She left the office with fire in her chest. But when she returned to the dining room, Oliver was gone. Later that night the wind howled harder. Doris stood by the bus stop, her thin coat no match for the biting cold. She thought about going home, she thought about letting it go, but she didn't. Instead, she walked 3 blocks in the opposite direction. Behind an old wine shop was a crumbling alley, dark, damp, forgotten. She turned the corner, and there he was, Oliver, curled up near a stack of crates, coughing violently. "Jesus!" she whispered, rushing to him. His eyes fluttered open. He was barely conscious. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "And you shouldn't be dying in a back alley," she snapped, wrapping her scarf around his shoulders. He chuckled weakly. "I've had worse nights." "Not tonight," she muttered. "Get up." "I can't." She looked around. No one. Just the wind. Just the fear. So she did something unthinkable. She pulled out her phone and called her cousin who drove an Uber part-time. 20 minutes later, Oliver was in her apartment, a small 1-bedroom above a laundromat on the east side. The walls were thin, the heater was louder than the TV, and the couch had seen better decades, but it was warm, and it was safe. She handed him dry clothes, her late father's hoodie and sweatpants, and turned her back while he changed in the bathroom. When he emerged, she nearly gasped. Cleaned up, he looked familiar, too familiar. She shoved the thought away. He sat slowly on the couch, blanket over his lap, tea in hand. The color began returning to his face. "You didn't have to do this," he whispered. Doris sighed, curling up in the nearby armchair. "I didn't. But I did." "Why?" She looked at him, really looked, and said, "Because no one should freeze to death 2 blocks from a restaurant that throws out warm food every night." Silence. Then Oliver said the thing he'd been holding back for days. "You're the first person who's seen me in a long time." That night they spoke more than they had all week. She told him about her mother, still on dialysis, stubborn as ever, refusing to let Doris quit the job, even though it was killing her slowly. He told her, well, not everything, but enough, that he'd lost someone, that the world had gotten too loud, that some people have money and still feel homeless every single day. She didn't press. She just listened. And for the first time in months, Oliver slept through the night, not in an alley, not on a bench, but on a couch, warmed by someone's choice to care. The next morning, Doris made pancakes, burnt, but he didn't complain. And when she handed him a small grocery bag with a clean beanie, gloves, and extra socks, he stared at it for a long time. "Why are you doing this?" he asked again. Doris paused, then gave him a half smile. "Because one day I might need someone to do it for me." Outside, the city didn't care about their quiet moment of humanity, but inside that apartment, something irreversible had happened. A billionaire had been shown more dignity by a waitress with nothing than by a room full of executives with everything. And he wasn't going back to pretending anymore. The snow didn't stop for days. Oliver stayed at Doris's apartment for 3 nights, too proud to say thank you, too ashamed to leave. He offered to go twice, but each time she just pushed a bowl toward him and said, "Eat first, then decide." And somehow, he always stayed. But something in Doris had shifted. She started watching him differently, not with suspicion, but with recognition. It was like trying to place a dream you keep forgetting every time you wake up. The way he stirred his tea with his pinky lifted. The way he looked at the ceiling before answering questions, like he was calculating truth. The way he flinched at the sound of champagne corks in that TV commercial. She couldn't explain it, but she knew. He wasn't who he claimed to be. On the 4th day, she returned from work earlier than usual, soaked from the slush storm outside. Oliver was in her living room, sipping tea and watching a black and white movie on mute. He turned when she walked in and said softly, "You look like hell." She dropped her purse and kicked off her wet boots. I could say the same to you. He grinned. For the first time, it felt like home. After she changed into dry clothes, they sat in silence for a while, until Doris pulled something from her bag and tossed it gently on the table. It was a printout from an article. The fall of Oliver Peters, billionaire, vanishes after brother's death and divorce scandal. The photo showed him, clean-shaven, suit, smile too tight, but unmistakably him. She didn't say anything. She just waited. He looked at the paper, looked back at her, then said simply, "I guess it was only a matter of time." She sat down across from him, folding her arms. "Why didn't you tell me?" Oliver's jaw tensed. "Because I wanted to be treated like a human before being treated like a headline." Doris stared at him, not out of anger, but out of disbelief. "All this time, you let me think." He cut in, voice low, raw. "I let you see me the way I couldn't even see myself." He stood, walked to the window, fingers pressed to the glass. "My brother overdosed in the guest room of my lake house. I was hosting a fundraiser while he was dying upstairs. My wife left me 2 weeks later. She said she couldn't stand to be with someone who saved the world on camera and let his own family rot behind closed doors." He turned, eyes wet now. "So I disappeared." Doris swallowed hard. She wasn't angry. She was hurt, because she had trusted him, offered him shelter, food, warmth, not knowing he could have bought her building 10 times over. "You let me give you everything, when you had everything." He shook his head. "I had money. That's not the same." Then came the silence, not awkward, heavy, and Doris asked the question that had been clawing at her chest. "Why me?" Oliver looked at her, really looked. "Because you looked at me like I mattered, when I didn't even think I did." At this point, what do you think he should do? Follow his pride or follow his heart? Comment below, because what happens next will test everything. That night, neither of them slept much. Doris stayed in her room, staring at the ceiling. Her heart ached, but not in the way she expected. Not from betrayal, but from the pressure of knowing this man could change her life with a single word, and had chosen not to. And yet, she couldn't hate him, because what she saw in his eyes wasn't power. It was punishment, the kind that doesn't come from anyone else, but from living inside your own regret too long. In the morning, Oliver was gone. No note, no explanation. Just a folded blanket on the couch, and the smell of tea still lingering in the air. Doris stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space he left behind. And somewhere deep in her chest, something cracked open. Not anger, not even sadness, but something closer to grief. The days that followed felt longer than they should have. The apartment was quieter without him. The couch sat untouched. The small beanie she'd given him still hung on the hook by the door. Doris Martinez kept moving, like she always did. Double shifts, early mornings, late buses, the whole machine of survival. But something about her rhythm had changed. He hadn't left a note. He hadn't said goodbye. But he had left something behind. A little envelope hidden under the pillow of the couch, with her name written on the front in neat, almost overly formal handwriting. Inside was a short letter, no signature, just words. "You saw a man everyone else ignored. You served someone everyone else laughed at. I've spent my life building things that make me feel important. But you reminded me what it feels like to simply be worth something. Thank you. O.P." Doris didn't cry when she read it. She just folded it slowly, carefully, and tucked it into the back of her Bible, the one she kept on the nightstand but rarely opened anymore. That night, she found herself sitting by the window, watching the snowfall drift under the streetlights, wondering where he was sleeping. She hated herself for hoping he was okay, and hated herself more for missing the silence he brought. But life went on. And then one day, he came back. Not to the restaurant, to her door. He was dressed differently, clean again, still rough around the edges but visibly changed. He didn't knock at first. He just stood there, like someone unsure of whether or not they belonged. Doris opened the door before he could make up his mind. She didn't say anything, Neither did he. He just held out a small cup of soup, the same tomato bisque he'd always ordered. "I brought lunch," he said. Her lips twitched. "It's 8:30 in the morning." He shrugged. "I figured I owed you breakfast, lunch, and dinner by now." She stepped aside, letting him in. They sat on the floor this time against the wall, eating in silence. "I shouldn't have left like that," he said finally. Doris didn't respond. "I panicked," he added. Still, she said nothing, until he looked up and saw the tears she hadn't let fall days ago, now quietly tracing the edge of her cheek. "I don't care that you lied," she whispered. "I care that you thought I only saw your rags." He looked at her, stunned. "You think I didn't know you were somebody? I knew. Maybe not who, but something. You carried yourself like someone who'd lost everything, and still had something left to give." Oliver blinked, and for the first time in weeks he let himself feel it, not guilt, not shame, but the unbearable warmth of being understood. They talked for hours after that, about grief, about her mother, about his brother, about how wealth doesn't erase loneliness, it just makes it easier to hide, about how kindness is a risk, especially when the world treats it like weakness, about how they both got tired of pretending. And then came the laughter, soft at first, then loud and foolish. He told her about how he used to sneak into his own restaurants dressed as a dishwasher, just to hear what people really said about him. She told him about how she once slapped a customer with a napkin for calling her sweetheart. He laughed so hard he spilled the soup on the floor, and for a moment it was like they were the only two people in the world. If you've ever needed a moment like this, where someone just gets you, subscribe, because maybe these stories are what you've been needing to hear all along. As the evening light faded, Oliver looked at Doris and said something that caught her off guard. "I want to fix it." "Fix what?" she asked. "Everything," he said. "The restaurant, the staff, the way people treat others when they think no one's watching. I want to make it right." She raised a brow. "You think kindness can be enforced?" He shook his head. "No, but it can be modeled." Then, almost nervously, he added, "And I want you there, by my side, helping me do it." Doris stared at him, not because she didn't believe him, but because she wasn't used to people seeing her as someone worth building with, not just building for. That night she walked him out. They stood by the door for a long time, before either of them spoke. "You coming back tomorrow?" she asked. He smiled. "If you'll have me." She smiled back. "I'll keep the couch warm." It was supposed to be a fresh start. Oliver had been working behind the scenes for 2 weeks, re-establishing his identity quietly, reviewing his ownership contracts, preparing to take back control of Le Vérité. But this time he wasn't returning as a shadow or a headline. He was returning with purpose, and he was bringing Doris with him. He asked her to take a day off, bought her a new coat. "Too much," she said, "just wear it," he replied, and stood beside her that Thursday morning as they walked through the front doors of the restaurant, together. The same place where he'd been laughed at, where she had risked everything for him, where this story had truly begun. Heads turned, conversations stopped. Even the clinking of silverware seemed to pause. Grant, standing near the bar, dropped his clipboard. "Doris," he said, voice stiff. And then, "Is this some kind of joke?" Oliver stepped forward. "No joke," he said calmly. "I'm Oliver Peters, owner of this place, or rather, co-founder." Gasps rippled through the staff. Grant looked from Oliver to Doris and back again, his face draining of color. "You're telling me that homeless man was you?" Oliver nodded. "And she knew?" Grant barked, now pointing a shaking finger at Doris. "She knew, and said nothing." Oliver opened his mouth to defend her, but Doris stepped forward first. "I didn't know who he was," she said, voice steady. "Not exactly, but I treated him how I treat anyone, with dignity." Grant scoffed. "You brought a con man into my restaurant." "It's not your restaurant," Oliver cut in, and with that he handed Grant an envelope. Inside, termination papers, effective immediately. It should have been a victory. But the room was thick with tension. One of the waiters muttered, So she got a billionaire sugar daddy, huh? Someone else whispered, "She played him. Real smart." Doris heard it all, every single word, and it hit her harder than she expected. That night she didn't go home. She wandered for hours, past neon lights, frozen sidewalks, a city that never really loved her back. Her phone buzzed over and over. "Oliver, you okay? Oliver, come back. Let's talk." Oliver, "Please don't shut me out." But she did, because the voices in her head were louder than his texts. "You played him. She got what she wanted. She saw a billionaire and latched on. And worst of all, a quiet voice in the back of her own mind whispered, 'Maybe you did.'" Meanwhile, Oliver sat in her apartment waiting. He'd left the key under the mat for her, set the table, reheated soup, tried to recreate the moment that had first brought them peace. But she never came, and for the first time in his life, not as a billionaire but as a man, he felt completely abandoned, not by the world, not by investors, not by reputation, by someone who actually mattered. The next morning, she returned, eyes red, silent, shoulders tight. She walked in, dropped her purse and stood there. Oliver rose from the table slowly. "I thought I lost you," he said quietly. "You might have," she said. The air between them was raw, electric with what wasn't being said. "I didn't ask for this," she added. "I know. I didn't do any of this for money or position or—" "I know," he said again, louder now. "I never thought that." She turned away, wiping her eyes. But what shattered him wasn't her tears. It was the distance she placed between them, the wall, the silence. Because it wasn't anger she was carrying, it was shame. She sat down at the edge of the couch, voice barely above a whisper. "You made me feel like I belonged, and now the whole world thinks I used you." Oliver knelt beside her. "I would give it all up, again, if it meant being seen the way you saw me in that booth." Silence. Then she said the one thing he wasn't ready for. "I need space." He nodded. "For how long?" "I don't know." He left that afternoon. No goodbye kiss, no final words. Just a man walking away from something that had almost felt like home again. And Doris sat in the quiet, staring at the soup he left behind. Cold, untouched, just like everything they were about to lose. The snow had stopped. Montrose Heights glistened under a pale winter sun, but Doris Martinez didn't feel the warmth of it. The city was quieter now, or maybe it was just her thoughts finally drowning out the noise. She didn't go into work that morning, didn't answer Oliver's messages, didn't even return her mother's call. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, replaying every moment of the past 2 weeks like a film she wasn't sure she wanted to watch. The soup, the scarf, the couch, his eyes, the way he smiled like it hurt, the way he looked at her like she mattered, the headlines, the whispers, the shame, and now, the silence. On the other side of town, Oliver Peters sat alone in the penthouse suite of a downtown hotel, a place he once used for meetings and celebrations, now feeling more like a gilded cage. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, but the view offered no comfort, only distance. On the glass coffee table sat the scarf Doris had wrapped around him that first night, folded, untouched. His phone vibrated again, not from her. A message from the board of directors. They wanted to meet, celebrate his comeback, announce his return. He didn't reply, because something in him had shifted. He didn't want a comeback. He wanted Doris. But wanting her wasn't enough. He had to ask himself the hardest question. Did I show up for her? Or did I hide behind what she gave me? He had spent a lifetime solving problems with money, power, control. But Doris didn't want that. She wanted honesty. And he had broken that the moment he let her defend him without knowing the full truth. At the same time, Doris was asking her own question. Did he see me? Or did he just need saving? She had built her life around self-preservation, around not getting involved, around staying invisible. But with Oliver she had stepped out of the shadows. And now? She didn't know who she was to him anymore. A waitress, a warm couch, a redemption story. Or something. More. Later that night she walked the streets alone, not aimlessly, purposefully. She found herself in front of La Vérité, lights off, windows dark. The same place where everything had started. She stood there for a long time, hand pressed to the glass, remembering the first time she saw him, how broken he looked, how broken she was. And yet, they had seen each other, really seen. Oliver, in the meantime, walked into the tiny corner store near Doris's apartment. He didn't know why. He wasn't hungry. But he found himself picking up a jar of that off-brand instant coffee she loved. The one she said tasted like punishment, but kept her awake. He smiled, for the first time in days, and then he did something he hadn't done in a long, long time. He wrote a letter. Back in her apartment, Doris opened the mailbox to find an envelope with no name. Just her address and a wax seal. Inside, a letter. Simple. Sincere. Doris, you never asked me for anything. And that's what made your kindness more valuable than any gift I've ever received. You showed me how much I'd forgotten to feel, and I was scared of what that meant. I left because I thought I was doing the noble thing, giving you space to breathe. But now I realize I was choosing pride over presence. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. But if there's even the smallest part of you that still believes in what we were building, I'll be at the booth. Tomorrow, 11:57 a.m. window seat. The soup's on me this time. O.P. At this moment, both of them have a choice. Would you take the risk, or protect your heart and walk away? Drop your answer below, because this next part may just break you. Doris stood there holding the letter, heart pounding. She had faced colder winters, harder choices, lonelier nights, but none of them felt quite like this. Because love, real love, doesn't scream or chase or beg. It waits, it shows up, and now the choice was hers. 11:57 a.m. Exactly 1 week after the day the truth exploded, the day the whispers started, the day she said she needed space, the day he walked away without knowing if he'd ever get her back. La Vérité had been cleaned up, dusted, rebranded under new leadership. The logo hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had. A framed note now hung by the entrance. Everyone deserves to be served with dignity, especially when they don't look like they deserve it. O.P. inside. The window booth sat empty, except for a single rose in a water glass, and a cup of soup, still steaming. Oliver sat quietly, hands clasped, watching the street. His eyes scanned every face that passed, every shadow, every coat that resembled hers. He checked the time again. 11:59. He exhaled. Maybe she wasn't coming. Maybe the letter hadn't reached her. Maybe he'd made a mistake believing redemption was something you could choose. But then, the bell above the door chimed. He didn't turn immediately. He didn't want to hope too fast. But the hush that fell across the room told him everything. And when he finally turned around, she was there. Doris, in her same waitress uniform, apron folded, hair pulled back, no makeup, tired eyes. But the look on her face, it wasn't anger. It wasn't doubt. It was peace. She walked to the table slowly, then sat, without a word. He looked at her like he couldn't believe she was real. She picked up the spoon, dipped it in the soup, and took a bite, then looked at him with a small smirk. "Still need salt," she said. Oliver laughed. The real kind, the kind that shakes the chest. And just like that, the tension broke. They didn't say much at first. They didn't need to. Some bonds don't require explanation, just showing up. But finally he spoke. "I meant every word in that letter." She nodded. "I know. You didn't have to come." She shrugged. "You didn't have to wait." A pause. Then she added more seriously, "But you did." The waitress on duty walked over awkwardly, menu in hand. "Would you two like—" Oliver held up his hand gently. We're fine. Just soup today. The waitress nodded and stepped away, wide-eyed. She knew who he was. They all did, but no one interrupted, because what was happening at that table was bigger than business, bigger than scandal, bigger than money. It was forgiveness. Oliver reached into his coat pocket and slid something across the table, an envelope. Doris didn't touch it. "What's this?" she asked. He hesitated. "A job offer." She raised a brow. "Not just any job," he clarified. "I want to create something better for people like you, like us, people who've been overlooked, judged, silenced. I want you to help me run it." She stared at him, stunned. "You want me to run a restaurant?" "I want you to help redefine one." Silence again. Then she smiled. Slow, certain, beautiful. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take your time," he replied. Outside, snow began to fall again. Light, quiet, clean. The world hadn't changed overnight. There were still people who would never understand them. Still rumors, still walls to break, still wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long time, both of them were home. Not in a place, but in each other. If this story touched you, if you've ever longed to be seen, not judged, hit that subscribe button. We tell real stories, hard stories, healing stories, and maybe one of them is yours. 6 months later, a new restaurant opened in Southside Chicago. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't trending, but it was full every night, the motto on the sign. Dignity served daily, and on any given night, if you looked in the corner booth by the window, you'd still find them. Her, eyes sharp, smile earned. Him, hands finally steady, soul finally full. And between them, soup, silence, and something deeper than love.